Boarding ships in the Dead Sea is one of the most dangerous jobs you can have in the Navy. But on my first mission, it wasn't the enemy that had me spooked. It was our own bizarre set of rules. And on that day, I found out the terrifying reason they exist. When people think of the Navy, they picture aircraft carriers slicing through the Pacific, maybe destroyers hunting submarines in the cold Atlantic. They don't picture this. They don't picture the lowest place on Earth, a basin of shimmering salt flats and water so heavy it feels like liquid mercury. My first deployment wasn't some far-flung ocean adventure. It was to a multinational task force in the Dead Sea, tasked with stopping the smugglers who use this geological freak show as their private highway. I was young, fresh out of training, and the newest member of a Visit Board Search and Seizure, or VBSS, team. I thought I was ready for anything. I was wrong. It was the rules that got me. They weren't in any official manual. They were passed down like folklore from the teams stationed here before us. We called them the Dead Sea Rules, and they sounded like they were cooked up by a madman. First, the immediate douse protocol. This was the weirdest one. If you got hit with any sea spray, a single drop, a light mist, you had to immediately douse the spot with your personal freshwater canister. Not later. Right then and there. In a place where fresh water was more precious than gold, we were supposed to just pour it on ourselves. It felt insane. Then the dress code. No exposed skin. Ever. We were operating in soul-crushing heat that soared past 120 degrees, with the sun that reflected off the salt-crusted water with a glare that felt like a physical punch. Still, we had to be in full gear at all times. Long sleeves buttoned, thick gloves on, and a full balaclava covering our face and neck. The old salts would just watch us sweat and grumble and nod. Heat stroke is better than the alternative, they'd say, which made absolutely no sense. Next was Rule 3. Goggles on before deck. You didn't put your eye pro on when you got to the target. It was the very first thing you did before even stepping onto the deck of our own ship to get to the RHIB, our rigid hull inflatable boat. Your peripheral vision was instantly gone. In the sweltering heat, they'd fog up almost immediately. It felt like a pointless handicap. And finally, the two-man catch. This one infuriated me. Any line, even a simple guideline, had to be handled by two people. It was this slow, clumsy dance where one person fed the line and the other secured it. A simple task one sailor could do in 10 seconds now took two guys a full minute. In a high-stakes boarding where speed is life, it felt like we were tying our own hands. I complained, of course. All the new guys did. The veterans, the sailors who'd been there a tour or two, they wouldn't explain. They'd just get this distant look in their eyes. I remember our chief, a guy whose skin was baked a permanent deep brown, listening to me rant about the two-man catch. He just took a long sip of his coffee. "Follow the rules, kid," he said. "They're written in salt." I had no idea what he meant. I was about to. The call came just after midnight. A klaxon blared and the intercom crackled. VBSS team, to the briefing room. The target was a small, beat-up freighter called the Starlight Queen, a name far too glamorous for the rust bucket on our surveillance feed. It was running dark, no flag, no ID signal, deep in a known smuggling corridor. A classic ghost ship. The brief was short. Intel suspected illicit goods, maybe weapons. The freighter wasn't answering the radio. Our job: board, secure, and search. Simple enough. As the briefing ended, the darkened ship command was given, and our own lights blinked out, plunging us into a tense, stealthy silence. On deck, the night air was thick and hot. We started gearing up, and the misery set in. I pulled the heavy balaclava over my head, and sweat immediately beaded on my forehead. Then the gloves, sealing my hands in a clammy grip. Finally, the goggles. I looked out at the inky black sea and the bright stars, seeing perfectly. Then, following the rule, I pulled the goggles down. The world narrowed to a plastic-frame tunnel, a faint ring of condensation already forming at the edges. So stupid. Our RHIB hit the water with a heavy thud. The Dead Sea is so dense with salt and minerals, it has this weird viscosity. It doesn't splash, it sloshes. Our powerful engine whined, fighting against the syrupy liquid. The bow didn't cut through the water, it bludgeoned it. I'd read an old report saying the first explorers here felt like their oars were hitting sledgehammers. That's exactly what it felt like. The ride over was tense. Just the groaning engine and the thick, wet slap of brine against the hull. A fine, greasy mist hung in the air. Droplets landed on my arms, and even through my gear, I could feel an odd, clinging sensation. I instinctively wanted to wipe it off, but remembered the douse protocol. As we closed in, the Starlight Queen loomed out of the dark like a carcass. Rust streaked its sides in long, weeping lines. No lights, no sounds, no life. The most dangerous part was next, the initial climb. A line shot up, and a rope ladder tumbled down, its rungs slick with corrosion. It was only a 30-foot climb, but it looked like a mile. When my turn came, I grabbed the wet rope, my gloved hands fighting for a grip. The weight of my gear pulled at me, and my arms were already screaming before I was halfway up. One rung at a time. That's all I could think. Finally, I hauled myself over the railing, my boots crunching on something. I looked down. The entire deck was coated in a thick, white crust of dried salt, like snow. The air was dead still and smelled of rust and brine. My team fanned out, weapons up, clearing the main deck. It was deserted. Just empty life raft canisters, rotting rope, and everywhere, that crust of salt. We found a line coiled near a winch. Following the rules, 2 of my teammates began the slow process of securing it as a safety guide. The 2-man catch. I watched them, frustrated at how slow they were. I caught my partner's eye, and we shared an exasperated look. This was costing us time. On a ship that felt this wrong, time was everything. We had no idea how right we were. After clearing the deck and the bridge, the only place left was the main cargo hold. The hatch was a massive slab of rusted steel, held shut by a simple drop bolt. That was the first red flag. It wasn't meant to keep people out. It was meant to be opened quickly from the inside. My team leader gave the signal. 2 men heaved the bolt. With a deafening screech, the hatch slid open, revealing a square of perfect blackness. We snapped our weapon lights into the void. For a moment, we saw nothing but a massive, cavernous space. Then, our eyes adjusted. There was movement. 3 or 4 figures huddled at the far end. They weren't holding rifles. They looked like desperate, terrified men. holding what looked like thick industrial hoses connected to a series of pumps and jury-rigged plastic tanks. Before our team leader could even shout a command, they acted. With a collective heave, they aimed the nozzles at us and squeezed. It wasn't gunfire. It was a roar, like a fire hydrant erupting. A high-pressure jet of liquid exploded from the hoses. In my flashlight beam, I saw it wasn't water. It was thick, brownish brine, pumped directly from the saltiest pockets of the Dead Sea. They were using the sea itself as a weapon. The next second is seared into my brain. Miller, who was always complaining about his balaclava riding up, caught the first blast across his exposed neck and the lower half of his face. He screamed, a raw, agonized shriek of pure chemical agony. The hypersaline water instantly started desiccating his skin, a violent chemical burn. His skin turned a shocking dead white as the brine ripped every drop of moisture from his cells. His uniform and goggles saved the rest of him, but that one exposed patch was destroyed. A moment later, the jet slammed into me. The force was stunning, like being hit by a fire hose full of wet sand. It knocked me back, but my gear held. The no exposed skin rule wasn't about the sun. It was my armor. Then the truly terrifying part. The brine coated my goggles. My world vanished. 1 second I was in a firefight. The next, I was blind, staring into an opaque white wall. The salt had crystallized instantly on the lenses, creating a crust as effective as a blindfold. Panic clawed at my throat. I was blind. I could hear Miller screaming, and I had no idea where the threat was. In that moment of pure terror, I understood the goggles-on before deck rule. If that spray had hit my naked eyes, the osmotic pressure would have ruptured the cells. I would have been blinded for life. Chaos erupted. My training was screaming at me to do something, but I couldn't see a thing. All I could hear was Miller's pain and the roar of the pumps. Then a voice cut through the noise, a bellow of pure command authority from our chief. "Douse! Douse now!" The chief's command was a lightning bolt through my panic. My hands, clumsy in their thick gloves, fumbled for my freshwater canister. The immediate douse protocol. It wasn't about rinsing off spray. It was an emergency decontamination. I ripped the canister free, twisted the cap, and poured the entire thing over my head. The cool, fresh water cascaded over my helmet and down my goggles. For a horrifying second, nothing. Then, the water began dissolving the salt crust. A sliver of light broke through, then another. Within seconds, I could see again, blurry, but I could see. I was back in the fight. Around me, the rest of the team was doing the same. We had all been hit, all been blinded. One by one, we came back online. Seeing their main weapon was useless, the smugglers threw down their hoses and gave up. They were just pawns, given a simple, terrifyingly effective plan to cause enough chaos to get away. We rushed to Miller. Our corpsman was already there, cutting away the fabric around his neck. The sight was sickening. His skin was blistered and raw, a ghastly white and red. The medic was flushing it, but the damage was done. He was alive, and his eyes were safe, but he was in agony. The importance of every single one of those stupid rules slammed into me with physical force. The ride back was a blur of adrenaline fading into cold, sobering clarity. We were all silent, replaying the ambush in our heads. Miller was sedated and stable, but his scream was permanently lodged in my brain. Back on our ship, the debrief was short and somber. Our commander stood before our exhausted, salt-stained team. He looked at each of us. "Now you know," he said, his voice low and heavy. "Now you know why we have the Dead Sea rules." Later, as I sat cleaning my gear, the pieces all clicked into place. The old chief found me and handed me a canteen. He sat down, and this time he explained it all. The no exposed skin and goggles on before deck rules were obvious now. They weren't about comfort. They were our primary defense. The smugglers had learned they didn't need guns. The very water we were floating on was a chemical weapon. Our gear was armor against the environment itself. The immediate douse protocol was our only countermeasure. The chief explained you have maybe 10 seconds to flush the brine before the salt crust becomes too thick for fresh water to dissolve it quickly. You'd be left blind in a firefight. We weren't wasting water. We were running a survival drill every time we got a little spray. But it was the last rule, the two-man catch, that delivered the final chilling piece of the puzzle. "What else could they have done, kid?" the chief asked me. "Once they blinded us?" I thought for a moment. "Trap us, disable us." He nodded. "They could have fouled our props." He explained that in the dense water of the Dead Sea, a brine-soaked rope doesn't float. It sinks like a rock. If a single sailor was handling a heavy line, a smuggler could have grabbed the other end, ripped it from his grasp, and fed it directly into the propellers of our RHIB. We'd have been dead in the water, blind, and at their mercy. But the two-man catch, the slow procedure I hated, ensured one person was always anchoring the line, making it impossible to be ripped away. It wasn't about efficiency. It was about control. Every bizarre rule was a scar left by a team that came before us. They weren't pointless bureaucracy. They were a shield, forged from experience and paid for in salt. Out there, the sea itself is the enemy. And the only thing protecting you is a list of bizarre rules that on that day I finally understood.